Well, we are into the last installment in the series that we started all the way back in January, based on the book The Big Picture by theoretical physicist Sean Carroll from Caltech, just down the road, so to speak. And today the topic is unity and the big picture. Now, just as a refresher, Sean Carroll is advancing an idea that he calls poetic naturalism. Poetic naturalism says that there is one reality, the natural universe that operates according to one set of rules, and there are many different ways that we can talk about that reality. The reason I like this idea so much is because it resonates with the concept of unity. The word unity, which means one, means wholeness. It's the opposite of division or duality. Duality is when we talk about more than one reality operating according to different sets of rules. And most religions are dualistic because they have both a physical and a spiritual realm which coexist, but they operate according to different rules. In the spiritual realm, the laws of physics, the laws of material reality don't apply. God can alter the rules on a whim. There's a joke about theologians who spend way too much time in their lives pondering the question of whether it's possible for God to create a rock that's so heavy that he couldn't lift it. You ever heard that one before? Can God create a rock that's so heavy that God can't lift it? Think about that for too long and you will get a headache. Well, of course God can create a rock so heavy that he couldn't lift it, because God can do anything after all, right? But if that's true and God can't lift the rock, then God can't do anything and can't be all-powerful, and around you go down the rabbit hole. That kind of theology is based on what I like to call the sky god, or the man upstairs. We've heard some folks talk about that, particularly athletes. And incidentally, that would be the same God that is going to be watching the Super Bowl this afternoon with the intention of blessing one team with a win over the other. I do have to say, though, I'm really encouraged because a few weeks ago they did a big poll. I think it was with the Pew Research organization, and they determined in that poll that only about 25% of Americans really believe that God is interested in football games and picks the winner. So at 25%, I can live with that, I guess. But there's a technical term for that kind of God. It's called classical theism. And the reason I became a part of the unity movement is because we don't teach classical theism. Unity really has more in common with something called natural theology. Natural theology provides arguments for the existence of God based on reason and the experience of nature. Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, now, he had no formal academic training. He had no formal theological training, so he never used the exact term natural theology. But when I read his different books, that's what I find. There's no supernatural guy in the sky, no God out there. There's just principle. There's just one presence, one power that is the source and the driving force of the universe and everything in it. Again, back to that concept of unity, non-duality. And incidentally, I found this interesting as a little bit of an aside here. Natural theology is the subject of an annual lecture series that is done at one of the 4 major universities in Scotland. They rotate around these different universities doing these lectures. They're called the Gifford Lectures. They've been going on now for over 100 years, and being asked to give one of the Gifford Lectures on natural theology is considered to be a great academic honor. So Take a guess who one of the lecturers was for 2016, who was invited to lecture on natural theology. Sean Carroll, the author of The Big Picture. Natural theology and poetic naturalism fit nicely together. Natural theology, poetic naturalism, it's really part of this effort that we've been going through for years now to try to get science and religion to play nice together again. It's tough, but it's necessary because we need both to get the big picture. It takes multiple and diverse perspectives to produce the big picture, and in case you haven't noticed it yet, diversity is one of the core values of the unity movement. We not only tolerate a multiplicity of viewpoints, we welcome them. One God, many paths, as we like to say. All truth is partial, and each piece adds something valuable to the whole. Just as an evolving universe requires a diversity of life forms and thrives on a diversity of things, the big picture thrives on a diversity of perspectives. Diversity coming together in unity. One reality, different perspectives. So we look at the scientific, or sometimes what they call the materialistic perspective. The scientific materialistic perspective focuses mainly outward on the tangible. In unity, our focus tends to be inward. We're working with the intangible side of reality. We're working with things like truth, goodness, beauty, values, meaning. That doesn't mean we ignore the external, because the intangibles have to work in the outer world as well. Otherwise, it's not practical, is it? The intangibles have to work in the outer world. But from our perspective, it starts as an inside job. That's what we do well. Scientists and engineers, they do many wonderful things that make life a lot more convenient and easier for us. They do lots of wonderful things, and so do we. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a chapter in the big picture called Constructing Goodness. And there was a quote there that I think really identifies our place in the big picture. So here it is again. Deciding how to be good isn't like solving a math puzzle or discovering a new fossil. It's like going out to dinner with a group of friends. We think about what we want for our individual selves, talk to others about their desires and how we can work together, and reason about how to make it happen. The group may include both vegetarians and omnivores, but with a good faith effort, there's no reason everyone can't be satisfied. What I'm hearing the author say in that paragraph is that the scientific method isn't very well suited to discovering and deciding how to be good, how to get along, how to implement the golden rule. The best way to do that starts with thinking about and knowing what we want for our individual selves, and that is an inside job. That's what we're good at in unity. We talk about meditation. We talk about the silence, going within, being still. And I hope we do more than just talk about it or go through it as an empty exercise. We are trying to reach that depth of self-awareness where we are very clear about what we really want for ourselves, and that includes gaining some degree of mastery over the ego, gaining some degree of control over the emotions. The ego and the emotions try to drive us in the direction of our, shall we say, more animal-like desires. You know, there's an ancient aphorism which says, "Know thyself." And a lot of people attribute it to Socrates and Plato, but it's older than that. The words themselves are inscribed on the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. And there's evidence, that's the Temple of Apollo, and there's evidence that it probably originated at the ancient temple of Luxor in Egypt. This next slide. That's going back a ways. And there's a proverb that comes from that temple which says this. It says, "Man, know thyself, and you are going to know the gods." Ponder that for a moment. Knowledge of that which we call God starts within, not out there. Starts with knowing yourself. Another word for that is self-awareness, which means, again, getting in touch with what's going on inside. What is our thought process? Where is the ego in this? Where are our emotions in this getting in the way? It starts within, but it can't stay there. It can't end there. One of our earliest books that attempted to summarize what unity was teaching is called Lessons in Truth. It was published in 1894. It was written by Emily Cady. And here's what she has to say about getting stuck within, or what I like to call too much navel gazing. She's pretty clear about this. She says, "I have said heretofore," I just love the way they use that language back then. Heretofore, nobody talks that way anymore. "I have said heretofore that too much introspection is not good. I repeat it. For there are those who, in earnest desire to know God, are always seeking light for themselves, but neglect to use that which they already have to help others. There must be an equal, conscious receiving from the Father and giving out to the world, a perfect equilibrium between the inflowing and the outgiving to keep perfect harmony." And notice when she says the Father, of course they always use those male pronouns and things back in those days, but Emily Cady described the Father as a presence within. You have to read another part of the book to understand that, so she is being consistent here. Too much introspection is not good. Too much. We need both the inner and the outer to get the big picture. I think what she's trying to say up there, I think what she says quite clearly, is that sometimes we have to get our hands dirty, right? Sometimes we have to leave the comfortable experience of light and love and bliss and return to the world. Otherwise, we run the risk of being too spiritual to be of any earthly good. Or we turn into a bunch of bliss ninnies, as I once heard someone say it. I thought that was pretty blunt, but it's a pretty good description. Got to be careful. You know, someone who was really good at getting out into the world and making a difference was Martin Luther King Jr. Back in 1964, well, you know, he did it so well that they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. And as part of the awards ceremony, he gave a lecture called "The Quest for Peace and Justice." I came across it for the first time 6 months ago, and it's brilliant. I've always been familiar with his other speeches. Most of us are familiar with other speeches like "I Have a Dream" and the different ones, but this was the first time I heard of this one. And I was thinking about him because the season for nonviolence started last Monday. It runs from January 30th. That was the date that Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. And it ends on April 4th, which is the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. It's a reminder that advocates of nonviolence like Jesus, Gandhi, and Dr. King often meet violent ends, and yet they accomplish amazing things. So I read his Nobel lecture again, and I'll tell you what, in the context of what we're looking at today, part of it practically jumped out and smacked me on the face. Non-violently, of course, but this was amazing. It's a long quote, but it's worth it. So here it is. Every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. So much of modern life can be summarized in that arresting dictum of the poet Thoreau. Improved means to an unimproved end. This is a serious predicament, the deep and haunting problem confronting modern man. If we are to survive today, our moral and spiritual lag must be eliminated. Enlarged material powers spell enlarged peril if there is not proportionate growth of the soul. When the without of man's nature subjugates the within, dark storm clouds begin to form in the world. And of course, vice versa. It works both ways. He was an amazing speaker. He was an amazing writer. And he said that 53 years ago, and boy, do we still need to hear it today. That's why we're here. That's our message. This is the part of the big picture that we excel at in unity. We're not going to eliminate that moral and spiritual lag that Dr. King talks about by authoritarian scolding. You know what that's like. Beating someone over the head with the Bible, that kind of thing. We're not going to eliminate that moral and spiritual lag by claiming special revelations from gods, from aliens, or special transmissions and things like that. We know what works. We know what works both on the inside and the outside. And when it comes to the inner work, when it comes to how we're going to eliminate that moral and spiritual lag, it's not going to be flashy. It doesn't come with a lot of bells and whistles and bling. We learn the tools. The tools are meditation and the silence. We learn how to separate truth from error, discernment. We separate truth from error. We affirm truth. We deny the power of error. We see the big picture with all of its warts, and then we choose to focus on the positive. We work with our system of virtue ethics, the 12 powers. We did a 7-part series last fall on that. We can use imagination to come up with creative solutions. We can use understanding to enhance our communication skills, and boy, are those essential. We learn to trust what we know to be true by using the power of faith. That's what faith is, trusting what we know to be true. And then there's love. A very misused and misunderstood word that I've talked about many times before. And I'm happy to say that after many, many years of wrestling with it, I've come across a definition. It's the one by John Steinbeck that I think really nails it. And I've put that one in your bulletin. You can read that on your own. But I want to give the last word to Dr. King this morning, because in his Nobel lecture, he has something very similar to say about love and how it fits into this situation that we find ourselves in of having to deal with this moral and spiritual lag. So here's what he says. We must now give an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in our individual societies. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts the neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all men. This oft misunderstood and misinterpreted concept, so readily dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response which is little more than emotional bosh. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. So there is another excellent definition of love to add to that one by John Steinbeck that really, I think, really starts to bring it into the realm of the practical. This truly is our part of the big picture in unity, because That's what we excel at. That's what's ours to do in the world. See you next week.